Have you ever witnessed something so absurd and petty that you weren't sure whether to laugh or scream? That's exactly what went through my mind as I tightened the last bolt on a 6-foot wooden fence, a barrier that now cuts straight through the lakefront, splitting grass, dock, and even the water itself, as if drawn with a lawyer's ruler. Behind me, a dozen neighbors stood in stunned silence, watching this audacious divider rise in the middle of what used to be our shared slice of paradise. On the other side, Margaret, cousin of our notorious HOA president, Karen, stood frozen, her jaw hanging open as her lounge chairs and half-finished jet ski ramp suddenly found themselves trapped behind a wall of lumber. The roots of this standoff stretched back 5 years, when I bought my dream home in Willowbrook Estates. The property came with deeded rights to a sandy beach and community dock, the heart of my family's summers. Weekends were spent fishing, swimming, and playing until sundown. That lakefront wasn't just a view, it was part of our lives. Then Karen Fitzgerald became HOA president. Within 6 months, she transformed into the tyrant of our neighborhood. She wielded her new power like a battle axe, issuing fines for grass a shade too long, banning wind chimes as noise pollution, and requiring written approval to plant any flower not pre-approved by her committee. Worse yet, she laced the HOA with nepotism. Her brother-in-law was suddenly their official landscaper, paid, of course. Her childhood friend landed the pool cleaning contract. And when her cousin Margaret arrived for an extended stay, it seemed the rules no longer applied. I first sensed trouble when Margaret began turning the shared lakefront into her own private resort. Not just a chair and cooler, she set up heavy loungers, tiki torches, a booming sound system, and even started building a jet ski ramp. The whole setup blocked everyone else's access. When I tried to address it politely, Margaret looked at me like I'd interrupted a royal ceremony. She announced that Karen had granted her exclusive rights, since I only used the space on weekends. She even shoved a paper in my face, an alleged easement reassignment from the HOA, and told me to file a complaint if I didn't like it. Skeptical, I checked. The document claimed the HOA had unanimously voted to give Margaret sole access, citing better resource management. A bold claim, considering 2 board members weren't even in town during that supposed vote. I went straight to the city and county offices. Sure enough, both confirmed the lakefront was deeded to specific properties, including mine. No HOA vote could override that without proper legal process. Karen's so-called reassignment was worthless. I brought this up at the next HOA meeting. Karen's reaction was pure theater. Her face turned crimson, her grip on the podium tight enough to leave marks. She screeched that the bylaws had been amended to give the board full control of all waterfront matters, and threatened $500 daily fines for anyone who resisted. She even waived another amendment, supposedly passed in a secret meeting no one else remembered. Meanwhile, Margaret's little empire grew. Music blasted from dawn till dusk. Her guests left trash all over the beach. The jet ski ramp stood like a wooden insult to the neighborhood. And when my 8-year-old daughter tried to swim one morning, Margaret physically blocked her, declaring it private property. Seeing my daughter return in tears was the breaking point. That night, I began gathering paperwork. As a contracts lawyer, this was familiar ground for me. I dug into my purchase agreement, property survey, the HOA charter, and decades of meeting minutes. What I uncovered was ironclad. The lakefront was deeded specifically to my lot, and the HOA charter explicitly stated it had no jurisdiction over deed rights. Any interference meant personal liability for the board. I drafted a formal notice and sent it certified to both Karen and Margaret. They had 72 hours to remove their junk from the shared space or face legal action. Predictably, they didn't take me seriously. The next morning, Karen appeared at my door in full dramatic fashion, Margaret trailing behind with a man she introduced as their lawyer. He looked more like he learned law from late-night TV shows than a courtroom. They tried everything: threats, bribes, even bizarre legal theories. Karen offered to waive my HOA fees for a year if I dropped the issue. Margaret suggested a schedule: Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays would be hers. Their lawyer mumbled something about squatters' rights, which earned him nothing but an eye roll and a polite escort off my porch. The 72 hours passed with no change. In fact, Margaret doubled down, expanding her setup and even starting construction on a permanent pavilion. So, I moved to Phase 2. I hired a licensed surveyor to mark the exact property lines. As expected, the shared lakefront was evenly split, and Margaret's resort sprawled across both halves. Armed with the survey, I hit the hardware store and ordered enough fencing to make a serious point. The clerk's eyes widened when I explained the plan. Word spread quickly. By the time I got home, the neighborhood was buzzing. When asked if I was really building a fence, I simply said, just marking property lines. At sunrise, I was at the lake with a full fence crew, permits in hand and mission clear. We built a clean, straight line from one end of the beach to the other, slicing even the community dock in two. It was practical, poetic, and devastatingly effective. Margaret emerged just as the panels cut off her loungers. Her coffee mug slipped and shattered. Moments later, Karen stormed down in a bathrobe and curlers, with half the neighborhood in tow. The meltdown was spectacular. Karen screamed accusations of vandalism, trespassing, emotional distress, even identity theft. She called the police, who reviewed my paperwork and left. She called code enforcement. They found nothing wrong. She even tried escalating higher, up the chain of government, perhaps all the way to the Pentagon. Meanwhile, Margaret's elaborate setup became a comedy act. Half her jet ski ramp was useless, her speaker system split down the middle, and her shade structure stood awkwardly across both sides like misplaced stage props. That evening, the emergency HOA meeting was packed. Karen had circulated flyers labeling me a menace, but it backfired. Neighbors had been quietly gathering their own evidence. A retired judge, Tom Harrison, stood first and calmly detailed the legal violations by the board. Sarah Chen, whose flower garden had been bulldozed by one of Karen's pet projects, followed with her own findings. One by one, homeowners exposed Karen's corruption. Then Margaret's husband showed up. He took one look at the fence, his raging wife, and the circus Karen had created, and made a quick call. They were leaving. As he supervised the dismantling of Margaret's resort, neighbors overheard him muttering about the costly mess Karen had dragged them into. Karen's final gambit came when she tried to issue an executive order to tear down the fence. But the HOA's attorney, silent until then, finally spoke. He stated flatly that Karen had overstepped her authority, put the HOA at legal risk, and had to be removed. The vote was swift and unanimous. Karen was out, but the fallout didn't stop there. The board voted to press charges. It turned out Karen had funneled HOA funds into Margaret's bogus easement paperwork and skimmed money from the landscaping budget to pad her brother-in-law's pockets. 3 months later, Karen found herself standing before a judge, facing charges of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. The verdict: guilty. Her sentence included 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and restitution of $47,000 to the HOA. As the judge's gavel came down, Karen broke down in tears. The mighty self-proclaimed queen of Willowbrook Estates reduced to sobbing in a courtroom. As for me, I still sit by the lake some mornings with coffee in hand, enjoying the peace and the sight of that perfectly straight fence, a reminder of boundaries restored and order reclaimed. And if watching Karen's HOA empire crumble gave you life, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, the next neighborhood showdown might be even crazier. Karen's downfall should have ended the chaos, but in reality, it only exposed how deep the cracks in Willowbrook Estates ran. Removing her was like cutting the head off a snake, but the body still twitched. The HOA board scrambled to rebuild trust, neighbors whispered about money that had gone missing for years, and everyone suddenly remembered how many of their fines, fees, and special assessments had mysteriously vanished into Karen's projects. The community demanded answers. At the next open meeting, the room was packed wall to wall. People who hadn't attended in years showed up, waving receipts, letters, and photos. One man accused the board of double charging him for landscaping. A widow said she'd been fined $200 for having her recycling bin visible from the street, even though Karen's own cousin left jet skis, floats, and trash piled at the lake. And then came the fireworks. A quiet couple from the far side of the neighborhood stood up and revealed something no one expected. Karen had secretly tried to amend the HOA bylaws years earlier to grant herself emergency spending authority. She'd funneled almost $20,000 through emergency projects that didn't exist. The revelation landed like a bomb. People gasped, some shouted, and the board members looked like they'd swallowed nails. Meanwhile, Margaret had become a ghost. After her husband dragged her out of town, her name was still on everyone's lips. Some swore she'd called the HOA office demanding reimbursement for the money she lost on her lakefront resort. Others claimed she was threatening to sue the community for harassment. But no lawsuit ever came, likely because her husband had put his foot down. Word was, he told her she could either drop it or fund the legal battle herself. That ended the discussion. But the fence. The fence became a symbol. Some neighbors saw it as a victory, proof that one homeowner could stand up to corruption and win. Others called it a scar, a reminder of how ugly things had gotten. A few even whispered about tearing it down once tempers cooled. For me, it was neither victory nor scar. It was simply a line that reminded everyone that rules matter, property lines matter, and people who abuse power eventually get burned. Still, I knew Karen's story wasn't truly over. People like her don't just fade quietly into the background. They wait, they scheme, and they look for a way back in. And in Willowbrook Estates, drama was never far from the surface. Life in Willowbrook Estates eventually found its rhythm again. The HOA, shaken and embarrassed, rebuilt itself under new leadership. This time, the board was made up of people the community actually trusted. The retired judge, Tom Harrison, who became president, Sarah Chen, who brought order and fairness to community projects, and a handful of level-headed neighbors determined to never let another Karen-style reign happen again. Transparency became the new rule. Every dollar was accounted for, every vote recorded in the minutes, every decision posted publicly. It was almost shocking how smoothly things ran once corruption was stripped away. Fines stopped being weapons. Landscaping was done fairly and cheaply. And for the first time in years, neighbors actually started smiling at meetings instead of glaring. As for Margaret, she never came back. Rumor had it her marriage didn't survive the scandal, and she retreated to some distant suburb where no one knew her name. To most of us, she became nothing more than a cautionary tale. Karen, on the other hand, never fully disappeared. After her conviction, she tried rebranding herself as a community consultant, offering her services to other neighborhoods. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. But word traveled fast, and in every place she tried to plant her flag, someone from Willowbrook was ready to warn them. It seemed her reputation would follow her forever. And me. I kept my fence. Some mornings, I sit with my coffee, watching the sunrise reflect off the calm water, and I can't help but smile. The line in the sand, or in this case, the line of lumber, still stands as proof that standing up to bullies is worth the fight. Neighbors sometimes ask if I'd do it all over again, knowing the stress, the paperwork, the shouting matches, and the sleepless nights. My answer: absolutely. Because in the end, the lake was restored, the community found its voice, and Karen's empire of pettiness collapsed under its own weight. That fence isn't just wood and nails. It's a reminder that sometimes the only way to protect peace is to build a wall, straight, strong, and undeniable. And in Willowbrook Estates, peace finally returned.